Okay, thank you. The recordings will be shared on our YouTube video, our YouTube channel, in case you want to just revisit this. As Lily said, these are opportunities, they're touch points to build a community of practitioners to help you engage in the application of biomimicry. That's where this whole thing is going to thrive, is when we're doing it. So my name is Jamie Miller. I'm the director of biomimicry at B+H, which is a global design firm. I joined them a year and a half ago, and before that, I was running my own consultancy called Biomimicry Frontiers. And then prior to that, I did a PhD in engineering that focused on systems level biomimicry. And I worked way back in the day with Janine and Dana back in the early 2000s, really honing in on their genius and learning the practice of biomimicry. And from there, I've been on my journey. Obviously, I'm not doing much else. I'm pretty committed to biomimicry. I feel like it is the most powerful philosophy for sustainability. What I say to clients is that there's no greater model of sustainability than that of nature. And there's no more comprehensive tool to abstract that genius than biomimicry. I'm quite confident in that. And I'm excited to see that this meme and this whole movement is starting to gain a lot of traction. A case in point, being hired as a director of biomimicry for a global firm. And we do work internationally. We're working on projects around the world. So we're seeing a huge uptake in biomimicry, and that's really exciting. And the point of these conversations is to help support other people build their own practice, their own business, their own pursuits in biomimicry. So as much as it is about sharing what we know, we're also here to have a conversation. So we'll invite you to engage in the conversation so that we can collaborate a bit while we're together. Cool. Lily.
Hey everyone, I'm Lily Ehrman. I am the director of the Biomimicry Commons. I've been working with Jamie for a year and a half now, I guess, which is wild how time flies. So I help to manage and oversee all of our educational professional offerings at the Biomimicry Commons. Our, the booklet that we just released last year, that's a PDF, like kind of the easiest entry. And then we have our self-paced online course. And then we also have like a personal coaching kind of cohort incubation style program. And I learned about biomimicry in undergrad when I went to UC Santa Cruz more than a decade ago, and got really excited by it because before that, in environmental studies and being kind of a young person in the environmental field was really overwhelming and a little depressing, to be honest. And biomimicry for me was this really hopeful, bright light that, a realization that we don't have to reinvent everything from scratch, and all of the solutions we need for a sustainable, regenerative, life-friendly future already exist. And we just have to learn how to translate and learn how to listen. And so I found that I wrote my undergraduate thesis on integrating biomimicry into education. I was really passionate about it. And then I started the master's program with Dana Baumeister in 2018. And she hired me to work at the Biomimicry Center because she was trying to start an undergraduate program at ASU. So I worked for the Biomimicry Center for a couple of years. We launched an undergraduate program. I got really interested in integrating biomimicry into education and not only what that looks like, but the importance of it, right? Like starting to collect information and data and understand the impact of biomimicry in these different education spaces. So I'm definitely more on the education side. I help develop curriculum. Now I host a podcast that is called Learning from Nature, just to kind of, spread this message a little bit more and have conversations with folks globally. And then I also work for a nonprofit in the Denver area where I'm based to get kids out into nature who don't traditionally have that access. So that's a little bit about me. There's a lot, it's all over the place. But let's get into it, and we can save questions for the end. If you are dying and want to add a question, something comes up when we're talking, definitely just add it into the chat and we'll make sure to get to it later, but we will open it up and have more of a discussion in a little bit. All right, Jamie, it's all you.
All right. Thank you very much. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. I always appreciate the time to connect with the community. So there's a couple things that I wanted to do today. First, I wanted to just go over what we talked about last time. I see these touch points, these bringing biomimicry to life webinars as a progression of a conversation. So I will highlight some of the key messages we shared last time in our first one. And then I want to talk about a specific issue around biomimicry, one of the big questions that I think most people have. And then I want to actually introduce you to a new project that I'm working on, to talk about how we're approaching it and potentially like how we could collaborate, or how ideas that you guys have worked on could be infused in that. And then finally, if you stick to the end, we have a pretty big offering to give you guys for participating today. So stick around if you can, and if not, email us and we'll let you know what that big surprise is. First of all, I want to just acknowledge that we finished an incubator, a spring incubator. It was our first attempt at an intensive incubator. We limited it to a certain number, and we had applications. It's the first time we've ever done that. In fact, Randy, one of our applicants, is here, which is awesome to see. And the point of these incubators was to help people expedite their project or their product that they're working on, or, to help them get it to the next level as quick as possible. Whether, Randy was working on, building an architect/design opportunity. He was also working on some written pieces. We had people building a biomimicry coloring book, one person building a VR experience through biomimicry, one person building up a podcast, and I'm forgetting one. Oh, a material designer also joined us. So this incubator we ran this spring was for people kind of in the process of building something out. We also host a mastermind in the fall, which will be coming up. That is for those people who want to kind of aren't at that stage where they have a product, but they want to build something. They want to build a practice. They want to really make this a part of their life. So if you're interested in that mastermind, that's coming up in the fall. But I just want to celebrate the spring incubator and thank them all, for being a part of that. And we will be sharing, more on their progress as it goes along. Okay, just to jump back to what we talked about last time we connected. Biomimicry, it sounds like a lot of you are aware of, the field of biomimicry, are in biomimicry. If you're not, it's a really exciting time. We're seeing a huge interest. Like, I think for as long as I've been a part of biomimicry, since 2004, I've always been confused why it hasn't been more prominent, or more practice. Like, why is this not in governments? Why are we not talking about this at policy level? I was always confused by that, and that was a big motivator for me, and why I focus so heavily on the application is because I found most of the conversations around biomimicry were sharing the same examples, and we're all leveraging those same, like, Velcros and whale power and Japan bullet train, or the bullet train. Like, we were pulling on the same examples every time, and I was like, there has to be more out there. And if there's not, what's stopping the application? So that was a major driver for me to get into the application and start my own consultancy. And we are seeing kind of a rapid adoption of biomimicry. They call it nature-based design, biophilic design, all these peripheral things where nature is being elevated as an important design parameter, a design lens, a design partner. We're also seeing biomimicry be applied not just to architecture and engineering, but we're seeing it in corporate organization, in community resilience, in economics. So we're seeing it in all of these different plays. And that, hopefully for you, whatever you're working on, hopefully that inspires you to know that you have a place in biomimicry. You have an opportunity to build it in your own practice. It doesn't matter what you do, and you don't need to be an engineer, an architect, or a biologist. In fact, I tell my students, don't read the biological literature until you have to, because there's a bias that we'll talk about. We have, you have a certain lens, and that's a big part of what we celebrate, is your lens is super important in the biomimicry process. So don't think you can't do it. You definitely can. There is like a rapid emergence. I've been tracking the biomimicry technologies for almost 20 years, and the stuff that's coming up is really exciting as well. So whether it's in academia or in labs, these are just a couple of examples of, algorithms that are learning from ants how to build better bridges. You may know the pine cones to make more efficient walls and buildings. There's really cool stuff happening out there. And I'm sure you've all seen this quote suggesting that there's expected $1.6 trillion of global output in biomimicry-based innovation that's going to happen in the next 7 years. So I'm saying all this because I want you to be inspired that if you're interested in pursuing a path in biomimicry, now is probably the best time. You know, when I started my company, I struggled a bit to really figure out how to make it apply. But we started to get traction in the 4 years that we were going, and then enough that 2 companies wanted to bring me in and bring my team in. So there's a growth happening and a global adoption. Also, if you have any questions at any point, just raise a hand or jump in, and I'm happy to answer. I'll keep the chat open too. The other thing we talked about last time was just some cool emerging technologies. So going beyond the whale powers and the bullet trains, talking about the materiality. There's a lot of stuff happening in materials. There's a lot of stuff happening in carbon sequestering concrete. One of my favorites is APL Science, which you may know. With Biomimicry Frontiers, we worked on the Guelph circular food economy, which is the first circular food economy in Canada. It was a $10 million project. And recognizing that nature has no waste, I felt like, yeah, we have to have biomimicry as a leading philosophy for this. And in that, we worked with APL Science, and APL have hilariously designed a fruit skin that's inspired by a fruit skin. So recognizing that nature knows how to package and maintain freshness, they made a fully biodegradable, non-toxic film that you can put on a fruit that it increases its shelf life. So it reduces food waste, has dramatic impacts on food waste, food costs, preservation, and it's fully non-toxic and fully biodegradable. It just copies nature. The cool thing about this one, and to build on this idea that nature's growing or biomimicry is growing, is that a few years ago, APO was evaluated at $2 billion in their, I think, Series B funding or Series C funding. I can't remember which one, but they're having massive influx of funding. And this just highlights, you know, people are interested in this, you know, this genius of biomimicry. The one in the top right, this was cool. As soon as I joined B+H, I saw this design competition out of the UK. And they specifically wanted, so they're making all of these tree houses in this this big garden. And one of the trees was specifically meant to be inspired by biomimicry. Like they reference biomimicry as the key design requirement, which is cool. We unfortunately lost, which was a huge hit on my ego, but it doesn't matter. It was good to see this design competition calling out biomimicry specifically. We also talked about some of the projects that we've worked on to give you a sense of, when I started Biomimicry Frontiers, I very much was like mycelium, where I just like shot a bunch of nets out to see where is there opportunity to apply biomimicry, who's interested, what sectors would add the most value. So I was learning, you know, my own interest, but also the temperature of the industries. So I worked with an indoor cannabis company in Canada. Cannabis went legal right when we started. And so I saw that as an opportunity because I knew it was going to be a heavily energy intensive and water intensive practice. So we thought, how could we improve the efficiencies of those? So we worked with Jay Harmon. We started 3D printing some packs and impellers. We designed a wastewater garden with John Todd, both I think in Janine's book. Both those people are in Janine's book. We also helped with their water strategy. We did a bunch of things with them. Like I said, we worked on the circular food economy in Guelph up here, doing a bunch of different really cool, fun exercises using nature as kind of our metaphor. We designed a house in India with B+H architects. This is where I first met B+H. And we use biomimicry at multiple levels, in the form and the shape of the building, in the process, like how it moves fluid, how it moves and self-cools, and also in the system. We built this permaculture garden that we wanted this house to go beyond this idea of doing less harm. We wanted to see if we could make a regenerative home that improved the ecological performance of the site. And so we did measure the ecological performance of the site before we designed and after our design, and proved that we are sequestering more carbon, we're reducing more rain events, or sorry, we're harnessing more rain, we're purifying more air, we're cooling the temperature. We're doing all of these things that nature does, but we were able to do it better than what was happening before our design. And then finally, this is kind of where I found my niche, is in the master planning. This is a master plan in Saudi Arabia for their airport. It's one of the bigger ones we did. But this is where I think my niche is. I love systems thinking. I love the application of biomimicry principles, the big things. And I also recognize that as a species, I think this is where we could have the most impact on climate change, a positive impact, where if we can find a way to reintegrate our built environments into natural ones rather than creating a glaring contrast, that's where I think we're having our biggest impact on climate change, is figuring out how to work more harmoniously with nature. And we'll talk about some of the methodologies I developed through that in my PhD. But this is to give you kind of a sense of the different areas we were shooting our mycelium strings out to. We're trying things, we're seeing where it's stuck, and ultimately I've kind of found my own personal niche. And this is what I encourage everyone who goes through our practice, is to find the niche that most aligns with what you're good at and what you're excited about and what the world will pay you for. Because what I found in practicing biomimicry is that you have to be committed. There are a lot of people who will say this can't be done, or you shouldn't be doing this, or this doesn't make sense, or it's difficult, it's too costly. And if you don't have a commitment to your vision, to your purpose, then it's easy to kind of back out and say, yeah, you're right, I'll just take a regular job, 9-to-5 job. But I do think that a big part of biomimicry practice is knowing your niche and finding your purpose and really committing to that. Any questions so far?
So you were talking about putting your feelers out, as you said, and looking into different sectors. So how did you discover that you liked the larger schematics? Was it just kind of trial and error that you had tried so many different types of projects and that's what you settled on? Or what was that discovery looking like? Just I imagine for a lot of people who are new to biomimicry and kind of figuring out what their skills or how their skills can be of service to this philosophy and this movement.
Yeah, great question, Alex. It was a bit of both trial and error. When I began, I did a lot of interviewing, what I found is building a practice, being an entrepreneur, it takes a lot of listening and having a lot of conversations. And I found that through that listening, I started to see what lit me up, what I was excited to work on, who was working on stuff that made me really excited. And then at the same time, in parallel, I was also doing, some self-development work and really honing in on, okay, what am I passionate about? What skill sets, am I most excited about honing and building on? What's the world really need? So through my PhD, it kind of gave me that opportunity to start to look at some of the literature and see, some of the conferences I was excited about. So it was a bit of fact finding, and kind of like mycelium or mold, slime mold. It's it goes and shoots out with no real intention. It's just to find connections and nodes. And then it starts to focus in on those nodes that have the most productivity or hope. And that's really what it felt like for me, is I'd meet a person and I get really excited about what they want to do and what they're working towards. And at the same time, I was also reading books and the things that excited me. I will say, we built some coursework that Lily mentioned, both a workbook and a self-paced course. And the whole module 3 is actually dedicated to this, helping you find your niche. So a lot of the activities that I worked on, I've put into that module so that you can actually go through that process on your own.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your personal experience with us. Very helpful.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Okay. Again, feel free to
I'll just add really quick. Sorry,
go ahead.
Jamie.
Yeah.
It was not quick enough to unmute. I'll just add really quick too that I'm in a lot of different biomimicry education spaces. I've worked with the ASU master's program. I went through that master's degree program. I worked with Learn Biomimicry. I worked with the Biomimicry Institute. And I'm most called to Biomimicry Frontiers because we've designed this course with that in mind, with not just here is biomimicry, but how do you do it? How do you find where you can fit in this ecosystem and flourish and do something that you love, but that's kind of a focused area of biomimicry rather than just here's the methodology or like here's the process. It's almost more about the participant and how you're going to apply it rather than what it is, if that makes sense. So I'll just say that too. And I do just want to mention that, yeah, our courses are one of the few in the biomimicry space that do that. And I think it's important because people get excited about it and learn about it, and then they don't know what to do with it. So that's why we're here and sharing about this.
Yeah, that's great that you're addressing application and execution, because it's one thing to understand the philosophy, but the how is a whole nother thing.
Yep. Okay, that's it on that. Jamie, go ahead.
Thanks, Lily. Anyone else want to jump in? If not, I will talk about one of the, like, really building on what you're asking, Alex, and saying, Lily. A lot of people get kind of stumped at the application part. So I've been talking about biomimicry for 19 years, presentations, and I get such a universal reaction. When they hear about it, the first reaction is, that makes so much sense to me. This is really exciting. This is very cool. Which is inevitably followed up with the second question of, how does it apply to my business? How does it apply to my work? How does it apply to my life? I could almost every single time you'll hear that question. It's the application that seems to be this big barrier, and a big motivation for Lily and myself is like, let's help people apply it. And so when I say let's help people apply it, like, I'm right beside you trying to figure out how to apply it. So the point of these conversations is, as soon as we learn something, we want to give it away so that we can keep building this this practice. Our mission is 2 billion biomimics, because once we have 2 billion people practicing biomimicry, that's when there's a system shift. You need 1/4 of the population bought into a philosophy, and the whole system shifts. So what I want to do right now is have a conversation and talk about, what have you seen as the biggest barriers to biomimicry? Whatever practice you're in, whether you're an educator, whether you haven't even started, whether you're in a practice or started your own company, I'd love to hear maybe your thoughts first as to what you think the barriers to biomimicry are. Yeah, Juliana.
Hey, excuse me. I think one of the biggest barriers is that people just don't know what it is, because I mean, I'm an educator. My degree is in marine biology. I was a marine biology researcher, and now I'm a high school teacher. And certainly my students don't know what it is, but even in discussions with people and friends that are also, you know, in biology at university levels, and friends that I went to college with, and people even in my own family, they're like, oh, what are you up to? Oh, I'm you know, taking this course from Learn Biomimicry, and and they're like, what is that? You know, and it's a whole thing then of kind of explaining, and they're like, wow, that's amazing. Like, I'd like to learn more. And I just think it's just not out there. And I think you're absolutely right. It kind of struck me what you were saying before. Why isn't everybody doing this? Because it just makes so much sense. And I just think it's not out there, which, you know, for me, it's personally part of the reason why I'm doing the project I'm doing with Learn Biomimicry. I'm trying to get the word out there to my students so that they can carry it with them as they go out into college and into the world, understanding that, wow, if you want to be an architect, you don't have to be just an architect. Like, you can go out to nature and look at how this applies. If you want to be an engineer, this applies to you. If you want to just be a builder, it applies to everybody. Design, you know, clothing manufacturing, there's an application for everything. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that they can learn to think and look outside and see how nature's solving these problems and then apply it to whatever. And that's, I mean, obviously what we're doing. And they're thinking about it now as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, 14-year-olds who are thinking about this. Then we're going to see change in the world.
Totally.
So I think, to me, that's the biggest barrier.
Does anyone want to add to that?
I would love to add to that, but I see Kevin has his hand raised. Kevin, do you want to add to the education piece?
Well, actually, it's a different subject. So if somebody wants to add
Yeah,
to
why don't
it,
I
you
just add a
can.
couple more thoughts on that? I just had something that it brought up, and then Kevin and I know Alex wanted to mention something too. But Juliana, I'm in the education space, and I can confirm that it's almost so grassroots right now that we see all these individual teachers kind of taking the time out of their day to take these programs and learn how to apply it, and oftentimes fronting that cost to figure out how to do it and become a practitioner on your own. And something that it is really important to be able to have this like movement shift for schools to see the value in it, and have it, it aligns so beautifully to so many standards in, national or the NGSS standards, science standards, state level standards, but it takes work from a higher level to like implement that. And so that's something that I'm thinking about too, because it's like we need both the grassroots and from the top down, especially with education. I teach an undergraduate class that I created, and it fills up so fast every semester. The students want it. But it's like the university was kind of hesitant to do it. And now I'm one of the only classes that gets filled up within one day of registration opening. Let's use that and learn from that and like offer it to more people or bring more folks who can educate in the biomimicry space in. So yes, just confirming that the education space is a really important part of this, because it's on a meta level. We need it from the ground up and top down, but also in the large biomimicry meme, the education piece is that ground up part. So it's going to be really important, and it's cool that there's other educators in this space. All right, we have a bunch of hands raised. Kevin, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I guess for me, I'm an industrial designer, and what I do is product design. And the main barrier I found when I try to apply biomimicry to my project is how to access the scientific literature that's, referencing what I want to study. So, for example, I was working on a filter that was inspired by the manta ray, and I can look online, and there's some things I can find, but it's so sparse and not really detailed. And so for me, that's really a big blocker. And I know there's this Ask Nature kind of search engine thing, but I think it's still limited. And I wish we could build something a little bit better. And then the other barrier for me is a bit of a network. So that's actually why I joined that event. Is just I really don't know anybody else that try to practice biomimicry. So anyway, those are my 2 points.
Those are
Thank
so
you.
valid too. And I'll just add, because I think this might actually be able to support others. And Jamie, feel free to add to this too. But that it's really valid, and people want to be able to practice biomimicry who don't have all the biology or ecology or chemistry backgrounds, and it is possible. It just there's like more of a lift if you are doing it solo. Biomimicry is ultimately a collaborative effort, so of course bringing in those people, if you can, get a biologist on board, or if you have a friend that knows a little bit more about it. Ask Nature for me, and I think this is just a good tip for everyone, is a good starting place. But it's not the end goal. So I start with Ask Nature. If there's a page that has something really relevant, I scroll down to the bottom, the scientific literature is there. Don't hesitate to get into the scientific literature. I know it can be a little scary, but skim it, read the abstract if it seems important, or if the visuals, the graphs, the figures seem relevant to what you're trying to do, read it fully, highlight it, learn about those words. Maybe contact the biologist at the top of the page, one of the PIs or the co-authors. There's a lot you can do with a scientific literature page, and there is a lot out there. It just takes some digging, which can be a hassle. But also another pro tip, if you read to the bottom of that scientific literature page, they've often cited at least 20 or 30 other papers that you can kind of go digging into. And so this is something I tell everyone in the biomimicry field, just don't be afraid to get into the biology, to get into the ecology, to learn, to expand that, be challenged. or bring in folks that do that professionally and know their one organism really well because they've been studying it for 20 years.
Before we jump to the other hands, I just want to address these 2 points because first, to the idea that most people don't know about it, I agree. I think what I find interesting is that biomimicry as a movement has perhaps overcomplicated itself to make it even more inaccessible by adding methodology, by adding these tools, by adding all of these things. I actually feel like it's much simpler than that. It's a very simple shift in our mindset. And so that's one thing I noticed is like, even in my office, my studio, there's about 450 people in my studio. And then we have access to 16,000 other employees through my group of companies. And it's like, they still think I just sit in the corner and do this weird thing. Like they still think it's a black box. They don't know what biomimicry is. So a big part of education is also simplifying it, getting it to its basic principles and not the flashy methodologies and the spirals and all that. It's like, there's simplicity to this. And that's the beauty of it. To Kevin's point, I do tell my students not to look at biological research. The way we teach it in our courses is and I used to teach at a design university where there's 0 biologists, and I'm not a biologist either. I dropped out of biology. But there's beauty in not having the bias of a biologist tell you what's happening with an organism. There's beauty in you spending time kind of abstracting it through this fresh lens. And making your own hypotheses and your own conclusions. In fact, I ran a workshop with high schoolers with the world leader in hagfish slime. And these kids in high school didn't know anything about hagfish. Most people don't know anything about hagfish. The leading researcher barely knew much about hagfish because it's such a unique hidden species. But we had these students looking at it with their fresh lens, asking, silly questions. And the amazing thing was that the PhDs that were standing around the room started to take these questions down, and a lot of them turned them into their thesis questions, because it's that fresh lens that gives a new perspective to this organism or to this feature in nature. And I encourage all my students to recognize that you all have that fresh lens. And I often say, don't blur it with the bias of a biologist. A biologist is coming from a specific paradigm, a specific way of looking at biology, perhaps, that might deter you from seeing the genius of what's happening. So we actually encourage people to hold off on the biological research. I agree. I don't use Ask Nature that much. And there's tools, and we talk about this in our course, but there's tools for you to abstract genius without knowing the biology. And I encourage people to do that. Okay, we'll go with Oshadi. I saw you put your hand up right away, so I want to jump to you, and then Randy and Michelle.
Yes, so I'm actually new to this biomimicry. I don't have any biological background, anything related to biomimicry. So I'm completely new. I'm studying innovation management in London, and I really liked this concept, biomimicry, and how people are doing different innovations in this sector. And that's why I wanted to focus my final year dissertation regarding biomimicry and how companies implement strategies related to biomimicry. So I really want to do this. So in my university, a lot of people know about biomimicry and the regeneration as well, how biomimicry can be used as regenerative designs. So, but I think what lacking is everyone think it as a trend, just like sustainability. So they don't just really think that this is a necessity. So they just follow it as a trend. So I've been working with different projects with LVMH and Arab, those kind of companies, and they just want biomimicry designs, but I don't think they have proper thinking or proper strategical view from within the organizations. And I think another reason behind is the limitations for commercialization and scaling as well. So because of these reasons, the companies are struggling to implement these biomimicry designs. But that's what I'm actually studying in my next dissertation, how these biomimicry designs should be implemented within organizations. So I'm really excited about it.
This is amazing. And Oshadi, I'd love to, if you could circle back with us and share your research, or like
yes, I
us to
just
share it.
Yeah, I just started it. So
Yeah.
it's been like a few, like 2 months. So I have like 1 more month, which I have to do like proper research. I really want to get back to you guys to talk
That would be
about your
amazing.
experiences as well for my research. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think those are really good points. Randy, I want to jump to you and then Michelle.
Yeah, thanks. So I think there's kind of a equation in a lot of people's minds, and when they encounter biomimicry, and on one hand, there's a fear of the unknown, and on the other hand, there's motivation. For most people, fear of the unknown dominates. Their motivation is often to keep their, whatever it is they're doing, just keep things going as they are. So, if there's an expectation of change, either you've got to work on your motivation or your fear of the unknown. And there's ways to do that. In practice, I'm an architect by training, and I work with architects and engineers on design methodology and so on. But so one thing, I think one big gravitational pull right now that isn't really made enough of is climate change. We have some real huge global issues. On the other hand, there's a huge amount of knowledge that's kind of buried in biological science and so on, and that all of that is taking place in a larger context. The educational system that we've got, the history of countries and trade and economics and all of this stuff. There's a huge amount of inertia in that system, right? So I think that if for biomimicry to make more progress faster, we've got to find ways of overcoming that inertia, either reducing sort of the friction of increasing motivation, reducing fear of the unknown, and also at the same time kind of producing results. I mean, there's a lot of tension in that, but yeah.
That's great. I appreciate that. The idea of producing results as a way of reducing friction.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Michelle.
Yeah, hi. I understand your point of actually having fresh eyes and looking the lens and not touching the biology right up front. But from a biologist's point of view, like I'm a medical doctor, so it's like I think of biology. So for me to apply biomimicry, I like looking at the literature first.
Right.
And I think that's something that biomimicry would benefit from, like if they would actually incorporate more scientific research in, have more authors who are biomimics, and actually put out this scientific information in the format that's usually seen with, where it's peer reviewed and just written with citing sources and just like, I think that's what's missing. I've seen a couple of articles where it does that, but I think if more of it happens, more biologists and more like, I guess in the scientific community would actually benefit from learning about biomimicry even more.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and I'll make 2 points. One, Lily and my philosophy around all of this is that Janine told me this, but we're not a bad species. We're just a very young one. So when we're talking about biomimicry methodology and how to do it, I don't see that there's one standard, that there's one way of doing it. So Michelle, your critique of needing more biology is it's really well taken, because what I heard in that and what I've seen value is that when biologists can provide accessible metaphors, like stories about what's happening in nature that I can understand and comprehend as a non-biologist, those stick with me, and then they are being used in design projects. They pop up. So you're right. I think there is a necessity for having, good quality research communicated in an accessible way. And I think like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's an indigenous plant biologist, and then Susan Simard out of UBC, they've done some good work at communicating some really cool metaphors and stories of the biological world, like specifically around moss and mycelium. That has really, those stories have been used and leveraged in biological or biomimicry research. So yeah, those are my 2 points, but I appreciate your comments. Any other comments? This has been really cool to hear the different perspectives on the barriers.
Yeah, one quick comment that I've learned over the past decade or so, that if you do want to change, I think one of the fastest ways to do that is to change your relationships. Basically find people, look for people who, can help you kind of get to that next level. That's really key. And I think if we applied that more and brought that more, I think, into the thinking about biomimicry, the philosophy of biomimicry, that we can think in more relational ways, that actually helps us to evolve more quickly.
Yeah. Okay, this is great. I'm gonna zip through because I'm clearly not gonna finish everything I wanted to, which is a good sign. But I want to zip through some of the key things, starting with, for anyone wanting to make like a biomimicry consulting practice, the key things that I found as barriers were knowing how to communicate the value of biomimicry. So there's one thing about communicating the beauty of biomimicry. I think a lot of us understand that. We've been enrolled in somebody's conversation about what biomimicry is, but every practitioner that I talk to wants to know how it's going to value them. And for me, the biggest the biggest way to approach that is like I said, learning how to listen to their pain points, listen to what's in the background of what they're not saying, try to communicate in a way that touches the points that gets them excited. For example, I'll speak to some clients and I hear what they're looking for is actually a legacy project. It's not necessarily, they've made their millions, they've been highly successful, now they want to do this legacy project. And they don't necessarily say that, but that's like something you can hear in the background. So learning how to listen to people. And as you're listening, this is the second point. If you can pull on these metaphors that you've picked up, and this goes back to Michelle's point, I'm not a biologist, but I've learned enough stories about the biological world that when I hear kind of their pain point, and if I can bridge that pain point to a solution with biology, say like, hey, this organism does that, that starts to enroll them even further. They're starting to see, they start to get the biomimicry lens, which is all I care about. They start to see that nature is this model or mentor that they can pull from. But it takes a buildup of metaphors. And I've noticed like sometimes that's a barrier for people, is if like you don't know enough biological research or enough biology to pull it out of your back pocket, then that's a place to maybe focus on for yourself. And then the third, and maybe the most important, is then taking that metaphor and knowing how to apply it, how to put it into practice. And in my experience, the only barrier to its application is creativity. I find that you can come up with, like, any idea is possible, It just takes a creativity in how you abstract that idea and also how you leverage existing technologies or resources, like Randy said, how you leverage your network. And what we do in our studio is that when we're practicing biomimicry, we bring really different perspectives together, because it's that diversity of perspectives that gives us a more holistic application kind of lens. Like there might be connections that this person who I would have never worked with has that would help us apply that metaphor, that helps us bring that design principle to life. So those are the three things: is learning how to listen, having those metaphors in your back pocket that you can engage that person, or doing a little bit of research and then coming back and saying like, hey, I know mangroves do desalination. I know that that's part of your big challenge, blah, blah, blah. And then the third part is then leveraging existing technologies or resources in this creative collaboration to make that real. And, to give you a practical example, I've shared this example several times, but in the India House, we learned that elephant skin is a passive cooling mechanism. I didn't know that beforehand. And then we designed a rock wall facade that just copied that metaphor, copied that function, and was highly inexpensive, easy to implement, and could be made with local materials. So we got kind of lucky, and that luck was through this creative collaboration. It's like, we just thought, what if we stacked a wall together, hooked it up to the rain harvesting system, the cracks act like the cracks in elephant skin passively cools through evaporation, and then we go from there. So it's those three steps I find are pretty important in the application. And that's specifically for consulting. Depends on what field you're in, but I wanted to share kind of what we've found.
I think quick, just to add to that,
Yeah,
to
Alex.
help with that point, is case studies.
Yes.
Or like you said, the stories. And we were kind of talking about a material library, or I was putting some websites, but I was wondering too, if anyone knows of some sort of suppository that just talks about stories and then how they were applied to a product specifically. Because I know there's websites that talk about, okay, this is the nature's, principle, right? Water storage and how the nature does it, but I don't know of anywhere as of yet, and I'm just starting, as a whole, maybe a book of it or a website that talks about, okay, here's nature's principle, and then see how it was applied. Because you mentioned there's a series of the same case studies over and over again, to expanding that. So I was just thinking that out loud, if anyone knows, to put in the chat.
Yeah, the biggest repository I know of is called asknature.org. If you're not aware with it, they do share technologies and they do share the abstraction of biological principles. But other than that, I think that would be a really powerful tool. Like you said, a toolbox of case studies and understanding the story.
And especially in different different sectors. So not just, product design and architecture, which I think is the easiest to connect it with, but also business structures, communication, the more abstract things as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Totally.
Oh, I see everyone's putting in the chat. Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, Carolina posted about Terrapin Bright Green. There's another point from Oshadi I want to read. Another point will be the necessity for collaboration between academia and industry. I believe it is crucial for translating biomimicry research into practical applications. I do agree. I think there's breaking down of silos that is happening through biomimicry that is necessary. And I will even add to that, we work a lot with indigenous communities in North America, or what they call Turtle Island, which that perspective brings a whole nother richness to it as well. Sharing a different way of relating to nature has fundamentally changed my practice of biomimicry. So again, I think it's this diversity of perspectives coming together and pooling our resources to help shift the lens. For me, everything in biomimicry boils down to shifting the lens. I think that is the most important thing, just learning. I'll give an example. Like whenever I do a presentation, this is usually where I start. And I talk about this as not just a bunch of trees, but like these ancient elders that have long lasted climate change, that are moving fluids up hundreds of feet without electricity, creating solar collectors with benign chemistry, solar collectors that fall to the ground in a circular economy, towers that are talking to each other, sharing resources and information. That to me is all I want people to understand biomimicry to be. It's recognizing that nature is this genius that we can draw from, that it's solving the same problems. And then the methodology, it's like, find your own adventure from there. If you want to follow a spiral, do your spiral. If you want to just meditate on one organism for the rest of your life, do that. But there's many pathways to making it real. The fundamental principle of biomimicry is just starting with that lens shift. And that's why I talk about bias so much in the biomimicry mindset. Those, I think, and those are disrupted through collaborations. When I walk through a forest with an Indigenous elder and she tells me that a tree is actually called a standing person or standing people, that subtle language shift totally shifts my perspective. And now I relate to that tree in a different way. So unfortunately, I think that's, we'll have to cap it there. Hopefully there's some value brought. There are other things that I was hoping to talk about. There are things online. There's a video online that I can share with you. And then I will briefly just talk about this project in Kauai, again with Indigenous community, where they've asked to bring biomimicry to a specific economic resiliency center and architectural design. And what we're doing is we're using our living story methodology, which is understanding the story of the place, to inform how that design can be a contribution to the place. Our philosophy is every architecture should be in relationship to its place, should be informed by nature, should be informed by the flows of that space, and should be a contribution to that place. So we're just kicking this off. We just kicked it off yesterday. So we're fresh in this, and I was hoping to have a bit of a conversation, but perhaps in 2 months when we have our next checkpoint, we can talk more about it and where we've gone. Any last comments or questions before we split?
I would just say keep doing more of these, and I really appreciate having the component where people are able to ask questions. Webinars are wonderful, but getting to hear from other people that are participating is extremely valuable. And then also too, I think someone else mentioned about having difficulty finding a community. And so these webinars, though, are wonderful, informational, also are creating a community. I'm seeing familiar faces, and yeah, so it's really great. Thank you.
Awesome. If anyone has to leave, I want to honor people's time. The surprise that I wanted to offer is that for the summer, our self-paced course, Inspired by Nature, which you can find at Biomimicry Commons, we're putting it 50% off for you guys. So if you want to take that self-paced course, just use this code SUMMER50, and you can get it for 50% off. Zainab, for those that can stick around, I'll still talk here.
Hi, I'm a biology student right now, and I've been taking like biomimicry classes. But like even as a biologist, I'm like pretty confused about biomimicry, and like we are all scientists, like agree or disagree. So like anyone can do biomimicry, in my opinion.
Yes.
It's like you have to shift, like as you said, your perspective on like how you're looking at it. But like my question is like, is there any place that is like dedicated to just biomimicry? Like I think that would be really cool, because like all my life I wanted to do like just biomimicry even before I knew the name of it.
When you say place, are you talking about research institutes or?
Not exactly. Like solving like problems by biomimicry. I think like that's what the world needs right now. Like for example, global warming, climate change.
Right.
Like we focus on wetlands, forestation, or like something like that.
Right. There are institutes. There's lots of research labs that focus only on biomimicry, or some sort of like a different term for a biomimetic approach. But yeah, and I'd be happy to share those, or Lily would be the best person to talk to if you reach out to her.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Monica.
Yes, hi. I am an architect and biomimicry specialist, and I live in Argentina. So our barrier is another kind of barrier, the technology and many things more. We have a lot of not like Brazil, the indigenous people, but I am very, the true, I arrived in biomimicry because of the indigenous people in Peru, Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
They told me that like an architect, they do all this building because rock was alive. So I think if they know that the rock is alive, how the tree, no? How we like architect, we cut all the trees and all the life. But well, this is my introduction.
Yes.
We are, you understand my Spanglish? And I am with Michelle in a small community that the name is, I put on the chat, Sharing Nature Genius.
Yeah.
That we are, it's a nice community because I work with a biology in my network, but to one time in the week we share information about biology and all that. I feel that not the research, but I totally agree about the connection, the reconnection that the human being with nature is very, very, very important, but also the science, you know, the technology and all that. So we are in the beginning of an architecture building, no, house in Buenos Aires, and you inspire me a lot with the elephant. We are studying capybara. It's in the ecosystem that we are planning the home.
Yeah.
So we are studying a little bit. So I perhaps I will share with you if all you the project.
I would love that.
And okay, so it's nice to have this community too. So you are thinking about having this kind of meeting. Because this is the first one. Or
second one.
I didn't know.
It's okay. Yeah, we just started. We're calling them Bringing Biomimicry to Life, and we want to have touch points every 2 months with a broader community. We also are, the Biomimicry Commons is the community that's gone through one of our, whether it's a do-yourself course or our mastermind groups, and that's a different community. So if you take one of our courses, we also have touch points with them, and that's to help them build their products, or knowing that they've gone through our education platform. It's like a different community, but this is like a broader for anyone. And we're going to do it every 2 months.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Unfortunately, I do have to cap it there. I have another call that I'm already 6 minutes late for, but it's worth it. So thank you so much for joining. And we will be posting this on the YouTube channel, and we'll send you an email with the links. So thanks again, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take
Bye.
care.